welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm her arm shouldn't be through that wall, host Madelyn.
I'm your walking off a cliff host Emma.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. This week, it's my side quest. It's my choice. Mine.
It's yours.
And we're talking about Jank. We're getting janky with it up here on Talk This Sunday.
I didn't look that hard to be fair, but I couldn't really find the origins of the word jank. I assume it's probably AAV, like most things.
Yeah. Several things were like, it's from the 90s. Which I guess, it's such a good sounding word that it feels, you know what I mean? Like, that feels like a combination of sounds that somebody should have put together before the 1990s.
True.
Jank.
It's
so
good.
Perfectly describes what it is.
It does.
So anyway, yeah, we have talked about, as Emma confirmed for me when I suggested this earlier this week, we have talked about polish on the game before. Yikes. Every time I make a mistake here, it's like charming Talk This Jank.
You're right. Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's also charming Talk This Jank that my microphone is like, I mean, my mic setup is always janky. So, you know, it's not shoeboxes this week. It's 3 library books on top of a tissue box.
Great.
So any janky sound from that, any mistakes, intentional jank for the theme of the show.
Yeah, it's just part of the charm.
Exactly. But yes, it does sort of feel like pleasing word sound that sounds like what it means. And the idea that only happened 30 years ago. Who knows?
So why'd you want to talk about this topic, Madelyn? What was the inspiration?
A few things. So one thing was, you know, we talked last week about Sid Meier's Pirates.
Right.
And you mentioned, you know, from that kind of like play along Pirates interview with Sid Meier, he had this quote where he talked about when we tolerate kind of jank in games. He didn't use the word jank. Sid Meier, I feel like, is too refined for that. But he said
too
something
old,
like,
maybe.
as long as players are having fun, they're not looking at the weird animations, right? They're not noticing the weird stuff. So, you know, thought about that. But also, you know, this week we had the release of the Elder Scrolls Oblivion remaster.
Man.
What's man?
Just, it was so funny that, you know, Xbox had been promoting, like, Clair Obscur so hard, and then they drop the Oblivion remaster the day before it releases. Kind of a self-own, it feels like.
Is a little bit of a self-own.
Also, who needs that? That's my other thing.
The Oblivion
Also,
remaster?
they've tricked everyone into paying for horse armor again.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really funny. But it was Oblivion that really made me think about this, because obviously the Elder Scroll games are famous and in many ways beloved, not in spite of their jank, but because of it.
Yeah.
And so the remaster coming out did make me think, you know, I mean, obviously we want this. Everybody wants this. I saw a lot of people saying they want this. So take this with the rhetorical tone that it's meant to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do we want this? Right? Do I want an Oblivion where people's faces look good or whatever, you know? So, you know, maybe think about jank and when it's something that we tolerate, when it's something that we like, what does it even mean? Actually, researching this podcast really made me realize, like, I had not really thought about what does jank even mean?
Yeah.
Which was interesting to dig into. And, you know, is it intentionally inserted sometimes? Like, why do we like it? Should developers be trying to include some jank? Are there genres where we tolerate it more than others? So all of that, thanks to Sid Meier and Oblivion.
Yeah. Pretty good. They did leave some of the jank in the remaster. I was seeing they left in, like, the voice actor, like, retake line.
Good.
Where they start saying it, and then you hear the voice actor go, Can I do that again? And then start saying it again.
But see, it's interesting too. Like, would we tolerate that now? I guess if the game was fun. Like, if that happened in Baldur's Gate, I guess we would love it, right?
Well, it was interesting reading about Baldur's Gate. I think we talked about Baldur's Gate 3 a lot during the polish thing too, and the polish episode. And like a lot of like the like, oh, it's so polished was mostly from people playing like Act 1, which had been available in early access for many years and therefore was of course very polished. But one of the articles I was reading was comparing like Baldur's Gate 3 to Vampire the Masquerade, which is a game that came out like extremely broken, but has become like a cult classic that people love. I'm trying to find. It was on, I think, maybe it was the Game Wisdom one. I'm not sure which article it was that was talking about this, but they said that they found it a lot more frustrating getting to Act 3 of Baldur's Gate 3 and finding lots of things that were broken because they had gotten used to playing a game that was very polished. Versus Vampire the Masquerade was broken all the way through, and therefore that just kind of became part of the experience of the game, was the sort of bugs. Which I thought was interesting, that like something can be janky and it can be really annoying if it feels like it's going against like sort of the ethos of the game in general, versus like if that's already like from the beginning you're inundated against them, it just becomes like part of the charm of it.
Yeah, something that came up kind of over and over again as I was reading about this was like user expectations, right? So jank is what happens, or one possible definition of jank is what happens when the user, the player, is expecting one thing from the game, generally mechanically, right? But, you know, also like ways about the world and how it behaves. And the game does not behave according to those expectations. So like Baldur's Gate makes sense why we think of that as kind of like very janky there at the end and not just like buggy broken, even though it is that, right? Is that like, okay, like it's polished up until that point, and then we're expecting the game world to continue to operate with that level of polish, and then it doesn't, and that's jank.
See, I feel like that's what I'm saying though. That one's interesting because to me that just feels broken, and I think to a lot of people that was like, well, this sucks. Yeah. And then to some people it was like, oh, okay, this is janky, and in some ways it depends on when you got to it. If you got to it on launch, I think probably you got there and were like, this is awful, right? Because like genuine like huge quests were broken, the endings of huge quests that you would have put a lot of time and effort into. And they would just not advance properly. And, you know, they fixed a lot of that. And maybe now you could call it janky. But, like, I do think... But sometimes you get games that are that broken from the get-go, and they still feel like they're just janky, not broken. Right? And I think it's the difference. It's fact because...
It's so hard, right? It's like a slippery thing to hold on to. If it
starts really polished and starts breaking down, I think that there are more experiences where that starts to feel like a bad game versus like a janky game. Whereas if it's sort of broken from the beginning that you open it up, that's more likely to feel like a janky game than a bad game. With broken, of course, being like to a certain extent.
Sure.
I think about like Cyberpunk too.
I was thinking about that as well when you were talking about these, right? And like in the user expectations lane. Like Cyberpunk, I feel like here's a hot take. Here's a take to throw out there. Right? Cyberpunk really hyped a game, right?
Wow, hot take, like,
yeah, thanks. That was the hot take. That was the really hot take. Cyberpunk got a lot of hype. Controversial, I know. Remember when we used to like kind of refuse to talk about Cyberpunk on this show?
We still haven't done an episode on it, and I don't want to.
Well, it's fallen out of being able to do an episode on it, so it'll have to wait like 8 years.
Yeah. They just released the DLC thing last year.
Okay, whatever. Fine. But, in that sort of line of user expectations, right? If Cyberpunk had come out somehow priming us to expect something that had some like weird jank to it, I do wonder if the reaction to it at first would have been different, right? Obviously, the reaction to this game is life-changing and Keanu Reeves is going to sit next to me on the couch while I play it, like, is not going to be good when there's like a turn that no NPC car can make and they all smash into the wall. Right, like those things don't jive with each other, but like there's a version of that where people would have been like really charmed by how broken this world was.
I mean, I think it's funny because The Witcher 3 is like a famously janky game. When people love that, like that never got the same level of vitriol against it that Cyberpunk did when it came out. And I think Cyberpunk's interesting because I think whether you've played it and it felt like a janky game versus a broken game is kind of personally dependent, because the bugs in that game were so like individual, right? Someone might run into something totally game breaking like every hour playing the game versus somebody else might get through most of it and there's just a couple of funny flying cars, right?
Yeah.
It was like very much not like everybody was hitting the same thing. Everybody had a very different launch experience with Cyberpunk, based on their system or their specs or their whatever. And so I think there's like definitely a line that a game can, and maybe the line is different for different kinds of people too, right? If Cyberpunk's like your one game that you buy a year, your line might be not as far as someone who buys like 20 games a year, in terms of like, this is what I can spend my money on this year, I would like it to be functional, right? Versus like, well, I can put this down and wait until it's done and play something else until then, right?
It's true. Some of the like, there's the question of like, what is jank, right? And then there's the question of what is good jank versus bad jank. Right, that we're kind of dealing with simultaneously here. And like when you have like time investment or like money investment in this case obviously plays a big role. I mean, that's the Baldur's Gate thing, right? Is if you've invested 20 hours across your much more than that gameplay thing, investing in like a particular story arc, and then it breaks at the end, you're going to be mad.
Yeah.
Reasonably. As you would be with anything you spent that amount of time on. So why do we like it sometimes?
I mean, I feel like a lot of it really comes down to like, one, that Sid Meier quote, right? If you're having fun, the weird little bugs can be fun, right?
True in life too, honestly.
Or memorable or whatever. I read a couple articles that were talking about like a little bit of jank is what, at least in the days when we still had like a social media that you could like share clips on, which we don't anymore, was like jank was like a way to like spread your game around, right? Because it would sort of naturally accumulate memes and reactions and whatever. So, in a way that's what makes it stick in your mind, the little points that are kind of weird, because those are the more memorable points than the polished parts. Yeah. But I do think jank is sort of separate from friction.
Sure.
I read some that were like putting them next to each other, and they are related, I feel like, but they're different things, I think.
No, jank can add friction to your game,
yeah,
certainly, but not all friction is janky.
Yeah.
It might be working exactly as intended.
Yeah.
I also think some of what I think about this a lot whenever we talk about Skyrim, so listeners, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but we like to feel like we're smarter than the game, right? And so like a lot of jank, sometimes it's, well, I guess we like to feel like the game is our friend. How about that? Right?
Sure. Okay.
Hear me out. Hear me out. So like sometimes we like to feel smarter than our friend, the game, right? And like jank sometimes lets us do that. right? When I can be like, F you, my friend Skyrim, I'm just going to jump up this mountain and you can't stop me. Or like, F you, my friend Skyrim, giants can throw me into the sky, right? Or whatever it is. Like, I feel smarter than the game. Like, whatever. Don't let me talk about trying, right? When I can be like, oh yes, I can stack 12 boxes and you can't stop me. Ha ha ha. Like, that's a good feeling. We like feeling like we like cheating, right? Like, we like feeling like we've outsmarted the game in ways that the game lets us do. And this is, I had an ever so slightly janky moment in the final boss fight of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where I got so screwed. I am so angry. So like fighting the final boss, I have an attack where like both of the characters that I'm playing with have gotten like taken down really low health. I'm like, that's okay. We've got action points, right? I'm gonna pop potions on both of them. It's gonna be fine. I did that. I'm like, okay, great. Done this in a bunch of playthroughs before. Gonna be fine. Gonna go great. Then my little summon guy is like, ah yes, it is time for Diamond Dust. I'm like, okay, like, the boss is in, like, kind of an immune phase right now. It's like, this isn't awesome, but, like, that's fine, whatever. Like, good little moment for me to stretch my baby gamer hands.
Sure.
Diamond Dust ends. I'm like, surely my character's healed. No. I'm like, oh, I guess they're, like, action got overridden. Surely I have action point to use. No.
Wow.
And then we got murdered.
You ran into bugs in that I did not ever see.
Okay, the chipmunk's bug was just that I was accidentally pressing the fast forward button.
I didn't even know there was a fast forward button, so there you go.
Well, yeah, so that wasn't janky, that was just me being stupid. That was just me holding the controller in my lap in a weird way, apparently. Well, I played the final scene, the unskippable cutscene before the final boss on fast forward like 10 times.
Wow, I wish I knew how to do that.
Yeah, wouldn't that have been nice for you? Anyway, getting back to the actual point, I can talk about this in 5 weeks. But I don't think of that like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as being like especially janky overall. It's not like a crazy janky game. It's pretty polished. At least in my experience playing it here, whatever, a year after it came out or whatever. But that moment was janky in a way, like I was pissed. Right? But it was janky in a way that felt fun for being pissed. Like my friend, the game, did something so stupid that I had to text like 3 different people about it. You know? I was like, You're not going to believe what happened to me here.
You're right. It did make a story for you.
So, you know, we like jank when either it makes us feel smart or when it gives us something, to share on former Twitter or the social network that you have that exists outside of social networks.
Right. I did try to brainstorm like a few categories of jank. I feel like that falls into like the one you're talking about falls into like the oopsies we ignored. I put in oopsies we hate QA, but that's just sort of like a catch-all for like probably maybe we found these bugs or we didn't find these bugs.
Yeah.
And that one's I put under like neutral jank because that can either be funny or frustrating depending on context, I feel like.
Yes. Emma, go through the positive, neutral, and negative jank.
Okay, so here's what I came up with. And this is setting aside like purposeful jank, which maybe we can talk about a little
later,
bit. Right? Yeah. And how, because that's more, I wonder whether that's jank or friction, but we can go into it. Okay. But some positive ones, charmingly cut corners. I'm playing the 100 line right now, and you can speed up your running speed, right? And usually you would make like a sprint animation when you do that. No, they just put the jog animation on 3 times speed. And like, yeah, why not? It's extremely funny. And honestly, it's not that important for him to have a sprint animation. So,
do you feel like, I'm not familiar with this game, do you feel like that matches the tone of the game?
A little, yeah.
Because I'm thinking of games where that would not be good.
It works. It's funny. I also think of like the segue in Rebirth in Costa del Sol. Sort of just feels like this is like a dev tool they put in and thought like this is kind of funny, so we left it in here. Is kind of how it feels to ride around, but in sort of a fun way. The next one is like complicated, ambitious stuff that couldn't possibly work 100% of the time, which I'm sort of thinking about like The Last Guardian is brought up a lot as a janky game where you have a very complicated AI in the beast creature that's following you around and a lot of environmental interactions and stuff, right? You're really going for something that's not really been done before, and probably you're going to run into a bunch of edge cases, but that's part of the charm of going for something really ambitious, right?
Okay, so I want to talk about that one, though, briefly, because I actually feel like both of these ones you've mentioned so far rely on and isn't it so funny how much of gaming and art in general relies on this, right? But, like, both of these rely on you, the player, having a, like, friendly perspective on the developers, right? Like, a cut corner is only charming if you're willing to be charmed by the people who cut it.
That's true, yeah.
Or, like, complicated, ambitious stuff that couldn't possibly work 100% of the time is certainly something that you could use to describe Cyberpunk or early versions of No Man's Sky, right? And those were not received as positive jank.
I mean, I again think there's this line that can be different for each person that defines what's jank versus what's broken, right? And a lot of articles talked about like jank is immersion breaking by nature, but you're looking behind the curtain at what has gone into making this, right? You're looking at the systems more. Like the curtain has been pulled back a little bit. So it also, I think, is dependent on your suspension of disbelief and also your attitude towards games, I guess. So I do think jank, a lot of it is subjective, right?
Certainly.
Versus whether you'd call something janky versus whether you call something BS, I guess.
But it's just interesting, right? Because it pulls back, we talk about immersion breaking, and I feel like this is immersion breaking in sometimes a different way than we talk about on this show. Like, jank not only pulls you out and says, hey, you're playing a game, it also says, hey, somebody made this game.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's like we've not just revealed the man behind the curtain, we've, like, cut his head open.
Sure.
That would be a janky moment to happen.
I mean, it's
the
another
camera
way
has clipped through and we see his brain.
It's another way that games remind me more of theater than like movies, right? Mm-hmm. When there's a mess up on stage and the players have to frantically improv to try to fix it, right?
Yeah.
Like whether your prop breaks or some sort of technical thing doesn't get triggered in time or whatever, right? You just kind of have to go with it.
Yeah, you talked about that a little in the notes too.
Yeah, we used to do like a high school.
I don't think that I saw the show that you're going to talk about, by the way, because I don't
remember like any of the specifics of the show other than this thing happened, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't even remember specifically what the thing was. I just remember that it happened. But we used to do this like high school theater reviewing thing, so we saw a lot of bad theater. And a lot of good theater, too.
We saw a lot of very mediocre theater.
We saw a lot of high school theater. We'll just put it like that.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this one, I can't remember what the show was. I think it was on a boat. It was some sort of comedy thing.
I do have to say, it's really funny. Like, the way you described this, you said it was a show on a boat, I think. And I immediately was like, showboat? But I don't think that is what you're talking about.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, and there was something, I think it was a prop gun or whatever, that one of the male actors was like waving around and it just like broke in half in his hand. And like he rolled with it, right? He rolled with it so good, and I still remember that happening. Even if I've lost the specifics, I still like have this sort of like fond memory of it, right? because it was like looking through the thin veneer of immersion that theater gives you, right?
Do you remember the Peter Pan one? This
I
would have
did
been your
once
first
you wrote
happy
it,
show
yeah.
ever.
I did once you wrote it down.
Where they had harnesses and they were supposed to fly and one of them didn't fly and they were like, don't worry, he'll fly later. Really burned in. Just amazing. Good stuff. I guess that was my first one too. No. Is that? No, it's not. This wouldn't be your first one. This was senior year. Never mind. It was the first one. The first one of year 2.
Right, yeah.
But no, we had like shows we looked forward to every year because we knew they would be like janky.
Yeah.
I won't call out what shows.
But
But
you
you
know.
know.
Meaningful anyway.
You remember.
Yeah.
But I feel like that in some ways gets at so like in theater, right? It's very easy, unless like this kind of thing happens on Broadway sometimes and people get pissed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like whatever, Nicole Scherzinger just had to sing through a megaphone last week because there was some kind of breakdown at Sunset Boulevard and they had to kind of cancel the show. And like that was kind of a charming moment that happened and like they turned it into something. But people get pissed when Broadway shows have technical difficulties and need to like pause or deal with that or whatever, right? And I get pissed when Broadway shows have to be like, ha ha ha, like our playwright is coming on. Because I'm like, dear God, how do you not have understudies or illness controls? But that's a different kind of jank. This is not a theater podcast. This is a video games podcast. The point that I'm getting at here is in theater, when something like that goes awry, like the veneer between you and the person making it, like the real human person who is experiencing or caused that bug, quote unquote, is very thin. Like he's right there holding the gun.
True.
That broke. And so it's very easy for you as the audience to be like, ah, yes, I feel empathy and understanding toward Joe Schmo in his senior year production of something that is not Showboat, or a show on a boat that involves a gun, and his gun has broken apart in his hands. Right? And so like it's very easy to be like charmed by that because the real human doing it is right there doing it. And I really feel like that plays into jank. Like if Supergiant releases Hades 2 and it's kind of janky, well, I don't know, like expectations for that are high now, right? But like we like them, right? You know, if something like is weird about that, we're like, oh, ha ha ha, like these developers were fond of, like made something janky. Or if it's like, oh man, Bethesda released another game and it's janky, it's like, like my kooky uncle. You know, like, they just can't figure it out. They have all this Xbox money now, and they can't figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's charming. And it's some of it is that ability to, like, see through to the human that made it and be like, haha, like, you did that. Oops.
Yeah.
And not like, haha, like, I hate this.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let you get back to your taxonomy here. That
Yes,
was my little theater sidebar.
My last, like, positive category was the budget was 2 quarters and some silly string, but they're going for it. Which I think about, like, I played the Caligula Effect 2 a few years ago. That game, that budget was 2 quarters and some silly string. But they went for it, baby. Which is, yeah, it's just basically when a game is, like, clearly... You know, it's sort of like ambitious, but with the like added caveat of like clearly this is not like a well-resourced operation, you know.
But again, notably, that requires some goodwill or knowledge, at least, of the people who made something, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like you've got to be like, ah, yes, you had no money, good work.
Yeah. I feel like no money is usually a little bit more obvious.
That's true.
Upon looking at something.
That is very true.
Than necessarily the ambitious stuff.
Where's your exploding stuff or ragdoll physics in Yakuza? Where does that fall?
I feel like that. So I have another neutral one other than the oopsies we hate QA, which is quirks of the game engine. Which again can sort of be positive or negative, but like Unreal, Unity, the Dragon engine, they have their own like quirks and things that are slightly off that you start to notice popping up between games that may be developed by totally different companies in the case of Unreal and Unity, but seem to have similar issues sometimes, which often comes down to the game engine that they're using. So like that can also be positive or negative, whether that's like the exploding stuff or the ragdolling is sort of quirks of the Dragon engine, versus like I don't know, like the weird lighting in Rebirth when you go from dark to light is sort of like an
God,
Unreal.
I hate that.
It's like an Unreal thing that pops up between games that were developed on that engine, which that one's sort of like here or there. It's just sort of a weird thing that kind of I stopped noticing it after a while, but it's clearly a little bit janky. So yeah, what you make the game on can also impact the jank level of it.
Yeah, it does sort of feel like physics systems in general kind of physics engines sort of fall under this category.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing I was thinking about, again, there is an article, this was from, I think you found this somewhere else, but I think this one was on their personal blog on gamewisdom.com, which was mostly on getting over it and jank. But one of the things they talked about was like, I could never see a company like Nintendo make a janky game as their entire philosophy is sort of anti-jank. And I was thinking about that because it's true. You'd think, because you brought up physics engines, right? Mm-hmm. You'd think that like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom would have bits that feel janky because of their very complex physics systems, the weird devices that you can make in Tears of the Kingdom and stuff. But even that feels very polished in their strangeness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at the coverage around, obviously those games, as big games do, have all sorts of like fluffy little blogs on various game sites about this player did this kind of cool thing, right?
Yes, it's like when you launch a Korok across the map just because you can in Tears of the Kingdom, like that's goofy, right? It's not janky.
It's weird, though, isn't it? Isn't that such a weird distinction? But I guess it's because it does feel like the game knows you can do that.
Yeah.
Right? The systems are so airtight. I think that's the difference, is the systems are so airtight and polished that it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm doing something that the game doesn't actually want to allow me to do. It feels like I am pushing these systems to their natural extreme to do something that, yes, like the execs at Nintendo might not be doing on their playthrough.
Right.
But, like, I am allowed to do.
Yeah. Or even, like, they announced, like, a very destruction-heavy, like, destroy everything Donkey Kong game for Switch 2. But, like, even that is, like, destroy everything in a very polished way.
Would we like a Nintendo game if it was janky?
I do think that's interesting because I really do agree with this article's like thesis that like the philosophy of Nintendo is very anti-jank in their personal game design.
There's a famous quote about this, I think.
Yeah. A polished game is always good. A janky game will be polished if you delay it. Shigeru Miyamoto, I think. There's something like that.
Keep talking. I'm going to be giggling at that for a little bit.
And then, negative jank is just kind of like stuff that sucks. And could be argued to not really be jank at a certain point, but just, like, bad game design.
Yeah, that's a question. Does jank have a mostly positive connotation, do you think?
I feel like it does. Like, I feel like if you call something janky, it's not necessarily that you're saying, like, oh, I love the jank, but you're implying that it's surrounded by a game that is interesting or fun. I feel like. You know?
It's the way you talk about your annoying friend.
Yeah.
You're like, oh man, like, what's she up to now?
Yeah, it's kind of like that, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I would have assumed that coming into this. Like, I hadn't thought about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you talk about Jank and it's kind of negative feeling, but of course, when you actually think about it, it's like, no, like, I just call a bad game bad.
Yeah. Like, you know, Unicorn Overlord, has
Your favorite game.
the game that was a game, has what I would think is like really bad UI. I would not call it janky, right? I just think it's bad, and infuriating sometimes. And like, you know, even that game's very polished presentation wise, and stuff. So you'd think like, oh, if there's like something that's kind of off, like you'd call that janky, right? Because the rest of it is like interesting or good. And maybe some people would, right? If they have more fondness towards Unicorn Overlord. But yeah, I think UI is something where something is very hard to stick in the jank category. UI is where people get very frustrated, I feel like.
Well, it's just like, what about that could be fun?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what about having trouble? I mean, now that I say that, I'm like, okay, like Bennett Foddy, like, get at it. Like, make a game where the like,
frustrating menu simulator.
Like, actually, I feel like you could probably do something with that. Like, to be very honest, if that was the game. But yeah, there's like very few situations I can think of where having a menu that is hard to operate, unless the game, is being like very, and this isn't even janky anymore, right? Like, you can do fun things with it's like, like, I've lost control of this, right? Or like, we're doing like fun menu things. Of course, it's a game. We can do fun things with any mechanic. But menus being like consistently frustrating to operate is hard to turn back around to charming fun.
Yes, exactly.
Before we talk about games that are like jank incarnate, right? You know, the games where the jank is the point. I wanted to talk a little bit, like, in researching this, it was interesting to think about what genres we accept or even expect jank in, and what ones were like absolutely not. So I feel like, you know, we've come to expect that open world games are going to have a certain level of jank. And like, frankly, I was thinking about Avowed again recently for this show. Can you even release a Skyrim-like game that doesn't have some jank? Like, if you released a really polished Skyrim-like game, would people even like it? I think it's 50-50.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said of like when a lot of games are launched, they're like in early access now, essentially, without naming it. But that's a separate conversation, I think, from just something being janky anyway. So
for sure. So we accept it in like an open world game. We accept it in a game that feels low budget, right? We don't accept it for the most part. I did read one blog where someone was like, I want more of this. But like in like a fighting game, jank bad. Jank real bad.
Yeah, I think if something's competitive, I can see how that would become quickly frustrating, right?
But like this article, this blog I was reading from Cayenne.mo, so really mainstream game site, was like, no, like, I kind of miss the days where there were only like 2 people in the world who could consistently execute the really hard combo. And like, I hear that, right? We've moved away, like, there's still sports, right? But there's sports in a different way now. We've moved away from like, there is someone who is so special at this into something we can all train for. Not that I don't think I could be a competitive fighting game person, but still. I also read an article about VR and AR type things.
Oh yeah, I would not as Miss Motion Sickness herself, who probably will never play a VR game ever again, I cannot imagine like a VR game being like really janky.
Well, except that most of them
like
are
physically impact.
Right? Like that's the problem right now. And this article was like very clear-eyed about this on realizedrealities.com. He was like, look, like VR is not at the stage of like a phone app right now, right? There's a lot. You can just make a phone app game that is much more polished than VR because we have way more experience doing that, right? And so this article is very much like, look, you need to be smart about how you're designing your game, because if you are putting jank in front of players in this situation, it's like so much worse, because the user expectation is VR, which is hard to, like, they talked a lot about video game discussion classic, opening doors, right? They're like, okay, like you want to have mechanics in your VR game that are intuitive. And so you'd think like, oh, what's more intuitive than opening a door? We do it without thinking about it all the time. Although, man, I feel like on this, I've been traveling a little bit, and like opening unfamiliar doors is not as intuitive as you think of it being.
Yeah.
But we as players don't expect doors to be hard to open, and this is true in traditional video games too, right? It's like the classic game developer's nightmare is how does your character move through a door?
That's why most doors in video games like open both ways, even though it doesn't actually make sense. They'll always push it open, whether they're going in or out of it, because who wants to animate a pulling motion?
No one. So they were like, okay, like be careful when you're thinking about things that are intuitive, because sometimes they are so intuitive to the player. Like you don't want to in VR do anything that's complicated, because that doesn't make sense. But sometimes you also can't do things that are too simple, because the technology is not really there, and the player is so used to doing XYZ that when it takes any thought for them to do it, they're like, ugh, what is happening here?
That makes sense to me.
Also was an interesting tidbit in that article about the Half-Life Alyx team, who they spent like the first year and a half of development being like, okay, like the crowbar is the thing in Half-Life, right? And so you gotta have the crowbar in this. And they spent like a year and a half doing that, and like came up with some good stuff for it, but the player has to be carrying it all the time, and they were like, that was doing really weird things, and we didn't like it, and it also made people think they were Gordon, but like that's a separate issue. And so they were ultimately like, okay, like we can't get this to work, we have to scrap it. Which was so crazy to me, because they pretty much started the game over from there.
Well.
So yeah, definitely some types of games where we're like, jank, no. No.
Yeah.
But then there are some games where the jank is the whole point. The getting over it. Or do you think that is just friction?
I hadn't been thinking of Goat Simulator. Goat Simulator really does feel like it was, like, intentional, like, jank.
It's really a jank simulator.
Like, the designers were like, how can we make this as weird and strange as possible, right? But something like Getting Over It feels mostly like it's just, like, it very intentionally supposed to be... There's definitely differences. I feel like we'd have to get into like a whole discussion of like what is friction in games if we were to like really define this. Because obviously there's different types of friction that you can have in your game design too. And stuff like Getting Over It and Goat Simulator and even like Human Fall Flat and stuff like that are very much like one category of that versus various other categories you could probably have for friction. And I can see how this category falls the closest to like the jank feeling, right? Because either the frustration or the comedy of it does come from like you not being able to have like perfect control over things, right? Or the game responding in a way that you didn't expect it to. Or something happening that was just kind of misfortunate for you, you know? So I see how that comes closest to jank out of like intentionally designed games that are meant to sort of repel you in a way.
But I think you're right to point out that for most of them, it's not really that they're janky. I mean, some of it is in the design ethos, right? Like, none of these games are, whether or not they are games that are low budget or not, right? They mimic that, certainly.
Yeah.
So we get that kind of sense of like, okay, it's this like awkward little game. But I do think for most of them, I think you're right to point out that it's not so much that it's janky, it's just that it is taking a mechanic that is usually quite simple in games and making it complicated.
Yeah.
And you're just not very good at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those games do get thrown around in the jank discussion. So it's, complicated to unpack.
Indeed.
Do you have any games you wish were jankier? Or less janky?
No, the more janky is an interesting question. I don't know. I'd really have to think about that.
I would like for Katamari to have less pop-in. That's my less janky thing. I mostly like the jank of Katamari.
Yeah.
Even if that could even be called jank.
Yeah.
It's a tough question, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are certainly games that like did not click with me that I would consider very polished, I feel like. Something like 13 Sentinels maybe is like a very polished game, a game that's very complicated that they clearly worked very hard on, but I don't know if adding jankiness to something like that would like make it better to me, right? It's interesting. Yeah, because I feel like I've played games that I would consider like almost too polished, but adding jank to them wouldn't necessarily fix my problems with them.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm thinking like, oh, like maybe I would have latched onto triangle strategy more if I had like a little bit more of those kind of like fun moments that had happened. But that game is like all menus. It's nothing but menus. So there's like almost nowhere.
I do wish that game encouraged, like they have systems of like, ice and heat and setting things on fire and stuff. And maybe if those were a little bit more well realized.
Yeah. You could accidentally start a forest fire and hilarity ensues.
Yeah.
And that impacts your score. Your
Yeah, exactly.
Like you burn down the whole forest in battle. I could take a little more jank in Kingdom Hearts, maybe. Not too much. I don't really want it in my... what I want is, I want a funny moment that I can text to Emma.
Yeah. I want games to be funny little machines.
Yeah, please make me a meme.
Basically. Well, any last thoughts on jank?
I want Skyrim to be jankier at the exact moments when I am trying to jump up a mountain and I've gotten like 2/3 of the way and then I get stuck.
So
more
true.
Jank. No, I came into this, I did not expect my takeaway to be like jank good. Or not even that. Like, I did not expect my takeaway to be like, actually we use jank as a positive word.
Yeah.
And yet I think that's the takeaway.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, listeners, do you have a favorite game that you would describe as janky? Do you agree with us that we use janky in like a, oh, I love my weird friend kind of way, and not a, oh, this game bad kind of way? Are there games you wish were more janky? It's a hard question. If you have thoughts on this or anything else we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Instagram at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts. Go ahead and subscribe to Talk This so you never miss an episode. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're talking about Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor for our old game. And I believe our new game was Blueprints.
That's right. So look forward to that. And then in 2 weeks, actually, it'll still be a side quest. Never mind. But
yeah,
the Emma's side quest.
We'll do the week after.
Yes, I was like, hey, it'll be a PAX week. But no, it won't. We'll be at PAX.
Yeah.
We'll record it on Amtrak. But yes, in 3 weeks. It's PAX Sisters Take PAX. What is it, like 5th edition now?
A lot of editions, for
2019, 2020. And there wasn't one in 2021. I don't think we went in 2022. 23, 24, 25. We are so back.
We're so
Wild
back.
Bills is back, so we are so back.
Look forward to us giving reviews of the soda.
Look forward to nothing but
else.
soda reviews. Games we played on. Let me talk to you about Wild Bill's Vanilla Spice. Well, that's it for this week's show.
All
Thanks
right.
for listening. Emma, jank us off.
This week, I hope that if you do glitch through the world, it still takes you where you need to be going.